Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter King. I'm with BCS Recycling Specialists. I'm here to talk about the strategic importance of reverse logistics and recycling in your operations, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, contract manufacturer, etc. Here's the agenda. We'll go over some of the basics in terms of reverse logistics, talk about business impacts, significant considerations that you have to take when taking into account a reverse logistics program. Then we'll wrap it up, and then if you have any questions or if you want to talk about any issues or concerns that you have within your own operation, let's just keep it open. Feel free to blurt out anything you want. All right, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about aftermarket customer service. It's broken down into two main categories: asset management and disposition services. So with disposition, you're talking about recycling, you're talking about destruction, you're talking about taking your product completely off of the market. You don't want it to end up in a secondary market unless it's something like an end-of-life component, which really has no impact to your business. Asset management, you're talking about inventory management, returns management. This is really tied in with your customer service and how you're gonna run that whole aspect of your business. Warranty management. This is much more of an integrated process, more of a partnership type relationship. Whereas with disposition services, you take into account things like it's just a vendor relationship. You work in spot transactions, or you need to get rid of something, or you want to destroy something. Happens on an occasional basis. Here's just basic graph of what goes on. Reverse logistics can happen at any point of the forward supply chain. So this graph is showing, at end user is really when it happens. And yeah, that is true. But whether you're a distributor, working in sub-assemblies, working as a contract manufacturer, an OEM, at any one of those points, you can conduct a reverse logistics operation. And that's one thing that most people don't realize, is that it's after it comes out of their hands, they feel like, okay, I'm done with it. Not really the best way to think of it, and we'll get into that later. So just some statistics of how this industry kind of operates. The secondary market is about 2.2% of GDP. It's about a $300 billion market. Thinking in terms of just medical device and manufacturing, it's about $20 billion market. So, and that product could come from hospitals that are just decommissioned, from the supply chain, whether it's distributors getting rid of old product or returns or things that need to be repaired. Reverse logistics constitutes about 3 to 4% of logistics services in terms of cost. So it's a really small percentage of your cost, and the benefit that you get from it is actually pretty good in terms of managing the impacts to your business, and we'll get into that later as well. So you can save 10% in your annual logistics bill, and that comes from reduced labor costs, inventory reduction, and freight logistics expense. The split's about 80-20. That occurs because you're pretty much mitigating your losses on inventory that's obsolete or end of life, or is coming up back through the supply chain. So what are the impacts on your business, right? You can't fall in love with something that doesn't love you back, okay? So inventory control, turnaround, warehouse real estate. There are clients that I've worked with sitting on inventory for years, aged end-of-life components. They sit on it for 2 years or 3 years before their accounting department allows them to liquidate that inventory. That's a problem of just falling in love with your inventory. If you're coming out with a new product, you're actually hurting your primary business activities. Yeah, you spent X amount on this inventory and you want to bring that inventory in and use it and maximize the value of that inventory or of that material. But in most cases, you're not going to get much out of it, and it's hurting you because you're taking up space, and that ultimately hurts your business. brand management and environmental liability kind of go hand in hand. If you don't have a defined reverse logistics process or have an understanding of how your product moves through the supply chain, even if it's not your specific business function that is handling that product, then you're ultimately putting your brand at risk. How? It could happen in two ways. One, there's the whole environmental side of it, where if it comes out and it hits a recycler who, let's say, isn't doing the right thing, and your brand ends up in some sort of river or some sort of landfill, and somebody comes across that, then that PR is ultimately going to damage your company. Okay? On another spectrum is the whole secondary market. How are you going to maintain value in your business's product, whatever that may be? Some businesses, even though their product is resellable, they don't want it on a secondary market. Perfect example of this, Apple computers, right? I mean, they're great case study for this type of process. They try to control everything from after point of sale. So what are people going to do with their computers? Well, they offer a take-back program. Why? Not because they're going to resell those things, but to maintain the value of their product. That's why their computers are so expensive, because there is no flooded secondary market. That's not to say that individual consumers aren't going to sell their product on the secondary market, but they're mitigating that from happening at a massive scale. And then there are the obvious factors. Cost recovery. This could happen on a direct and indirect basis. Indirects are things like, freeing up warehouse space for new product, etc. And then the value recovery in terms of what you're going to get for your product. Now, that could be for scrap items, things that are going through the disposition services. You're going to get a much less or a lesser value out of your product. Why? Because it's essentially what is the base commodity of the product and what's the yield of the most high valued commodity. So for example, circuit boards. People are pretty much recycling those things or disposing of those things for the gold content, right? So if you're not looking, and in most cases that's what people do because there are IP concerns and environmental concerns, so you don't want to deal with that. But if you come into a case where you do want to sell your product, then that whole remarketing aspect increases the overall return that you can get. But then there's that trade-off between how it affects your brand and the overall value of your product. Customer service. Now, this is a key component of asset management, and most companies incorporate this in their operations. And if they have it done through a third-party service provider, then it's a real strong partnership relationship because there are quality control aspects to take into consideration. So the way that you can think about it and the way that you can manage this process from inception of creating the product is you start with quality. All right? Are you going to put less moving parts in it? And how is that going to affect you towards end of life? The more or the less moving parts you have in it, the more reliable your product becomes, the higher the quality in the product, and then the increased reusability and or recyclability of that product essentially at end of life. Okay? If it's easy to take apart, in the industry, most companies want to be able to disassemble something under 30 minutes. So think of the most complicated technology that you can have, it should be able to be disassembled under 30 minutes. If it isn't, might not be a feasible disassembly process or feasible to commoditize that in a way where you're going to just scrap it out. So something to think about, and it also helps you in managing your environmental risk. So the considerations that you need to take when you're looking into developing